For those of you who don't know me, I think I know most people in the room, but I'm Dom. I'm the chair of MetaGrid, and it's my job to facilitate the panel we have today on all things, I guess, related to where are we now with respect to AI adoption. Where do we see AI going in this very big topic of the future of work, I guess, effectively. So the real challenge here is we've got 45 minutes, having done these before, is the time is the enemy. So I'm going to keep a real cadence going, but clearly want to get as many insights as we can out of the different perspectives we have here. Very, very quickly, I'm going to introduce a panel. Guys, excuse me, I'm going to do this for you very quickly so we don't waste too much time, but it's important that everybody has a good view as to the different lenses you've got. So we're going to start with James at the end. James is head of AI and data at GRIDS. So we're very, very lucky to have James today. Chartered quantities surveyor by background. I think you joined GRIDS in 1998, James, so that's a stint. Good effort there. Passionate, was clear with James's sort of background bio, is passionate about all things data in the world of construction particularly, and clearly that's where James has had his professional career. Cost management, procurement, I know has been involved in some very prestigious sort of student accommodation, large projects, some of the Oxford colleges, London colleges, listed buildings as well. So very, very grounded practitioner, but really passionate about data and AI in that context. Thank you, James. Another James, but I'm going to disambiguate by calling him Jim for the benefit of this panel. So Jim, his key kind of point here is a company called Project Science, so consultancy business. Again, right at the nexus of that company is the sort of passion of how data comes in and informs orderly project and program management. I think that would be fair to say that's been your passion, Jim. Greater predictability in project delivery, et cetera, et cetera. We'll unpack all of that. And has been involved in AI right back from 1999 when he had an AI startup. So this is not a kind of flash in the pan, like everybody else jumped on the bandwagon with OpenAI. This has been Jim's world for a long time. Come to my colleague, Ed. So Ed is actually, I think a number of you know, was part of the sort of the professional services team at MetaGrid. But Ed is sat on this panel really with his APM hat on, so chartered member of APM. And I think it's fair to say, Ed's kind of professional sort of development passion over the years has been sort of op model, all things to do with sort of people change management. But also a real professional curiosity in AI. Studied at the business school at Oxford Business School, particularly on the AI aspects in recent years. So Ed's going to kind of keep us honest to op model, people, change management aspects. And last but not least, my colleague Mark. So a number of you know Mark has presented over the years. So Mark is a senior developer at MetaGrid, but obviously really leads on our AI data research endeavors. Actually, as a bit of a segue, I did my original degree back in the early 90s in computer science and majored in AI. And I worked at the time for who was probably the eminent UK professor in AI, but we were going down a completely dark alley. It's now known as the dark winter of AI because it was a force alley. It probably had to be navigated to realize it was force, but it was force. So if I was doing my academics back in the early 90s in the dark winter, Mark is in the heat wave of here and now. So masters in machine learning, currently at the tail end of a PhD at Durham in AI, and particularly with a focus on explainability of AI, which is a bit of a sort of sub-niche we might get into, and talks at conferences all around the world. So we're lucky to have him, back in Bath today, but to really bring us to the real kind of current edge of where AI is going. Okay, hopefully that makes sense as a panel. What we're going to do, I'm going to give a little bit of a sort of thesis as to where I think we are now, a bit of contention in there, I'll get the guys to talk to, but this is what I'm going to try and navigate quickly. So firstly, where do we think we are now at the various organizations that we have sight of here? 5 or so minutes. Where do we see the vision for this potential go into? And I'm going to ask the panel there to sort of dream a bit as well. Really, where do we see this going? Next little block is, what are the risks and trade-offs that we're all having to navigate here and now in that context? And then when I want to leave the sort of majority chunk of time here for the sort of, what are we seeing as best practice with respect to the real kind of enablement of this journey? And we're going to look at that question across a number of sub-themes. I'll get to that when we get there, but fundamentally, strategy, delivery models, people skills, governance, tech and data, unpack it a little bit. And hopefully, we still have 5 minutes for a bit of Q&A at the back end there. Right, let me get going. And I'm going to get going with a bit of, I guess, a sort of a statement of where I think we are now, a bit of contention in there. Maybe the guys can agree, disagree. But look, if you take most of the sort of, the experts sort of surveys of where we are now, they would say this. They would say, look, 80–90% of organizations have clearly introduced AI. However, that is correlate with the fact that 80–90% of organizations are reporting they're seeing no material, meaningful commercial benefit of having done so. And what is actually going on, if you take that down another layer, is there's two aspects of AI kind of exploration that's going on at the moment. One is horizontal. And by horizontal, I mean, you introduce ChatGPT, Copilot, you've got some kind of Gen AI interface that everybody has been allowed to interact with. And so what you've got there is, hundreds and thousands of little personal hacks, and people have sort of improved their kind of working day, maybe. They're playing around with it. Vertically, you've got the sort of start of agentic AI exploration, and people are starting to dip their toes into the world Pip and Mark were talking about, and they're starting to build agents. But it's the Wild West. Everybody's doing it, it's fairly uncoordinated, and 90% of those haven't got out of pilot mode. Okay, so that's kind of really, I guess, a sort of very high-level summary of where most organizations find themselves now. We'll get to see whether the panel agree or disagree with that. So I guess, first of all, we're going to ask maybe a bit of a reflection on that point, but to describe how they're sort of seeing AI usage in their organizations now, both in terms of that horizontal, cross-functional, and vertical kind of agent, kind of deep point. And what impact, if any, are you seeing on your respective commercial P&Ls? And maybe we just start at the end with James and we work along. So,
okay, I think I'll hold this.
Yeah.
So, I broadly agree. And I'd say two things. There's the official figures of what you're using in terms of what the company's rolled out, but I wouldn't be blind to what I call shadow AI as well, that people using their own AI, and because you're not meant to use the free version of ChatGPT or Gemini, and I'm sure there's a lot of people doing that. So if you actually ask people actually what they're using, those figures I think will be a lot higher, and I've certainly seen people changing their workflows already. So if you said to most people now, go back to what you did, say, in 2022, they'd really struggle to be as productive as they are. But I do think that there's still a long way to go. We're still really, really early in this journey. And I kind of liken it a bit to the internet. If this was the birth of the internet, this is like 1992. And you think where we were with the internet in 1992, there was loads of things that were unforeseen about how we got to where we are now, and there were some milestones along the way, the smartphone being one of them, broadband being another, that kind of gave that step change. And I think we're going to have a few more of those. So I think it's really, really early, and I don't think it's a bad thing that people are experimenting. I think that's really healthy. And I think, again, it's probably going to look quite quaint when we look back in a couple of years' time about what we're doing now. But I don't want that to discourage people. I think this is all part of the process. So I think the actual reality is it's had a lot more impact than some of those figures say from the shadow AI, but we've still got a long way to go.
Sort of necessarily explorative, yeah. I hear that. Thank you.
So I absolutely agree with your point about shadow AI. That's the thing I observe in organisations, is people just trying it out, having a go everywhere. And so I've had to kind of get involved and step in and say, let's control this process a little bit, particularly where people are using public AI systems, which are, of course, leaking all the queries, even getting published in some cases. So I think you're absolutely right, the shadow is a really big thing to think about. The other big change I'm observing is in computer science, the sorts of techniques that now come about are changing every 6 months, 3 months even. It used to be 10 years ago, I'd look at something and a year later check it out, and now it's already here. So the pace of change is phenomenal, and I agree, it will look quaint in a couple of years' time, or should I say 1 year's time. Thank you.
No, thank you, Jim.
Thanks. I would corroborate the thesis. I'm working for a large client in dealing in satellite communications, where people genuinely are rocket scientists. But I would say in terms of AI adoption, we very much are at the early stage of AI as a feature. and from a business change, operating model design perspective, kind of driving that adoption and getting a wider, broader base of people to understand what it looks like to adopt AI is a challenge. I think the deconstruction of the architectural layers that we went through in your talk earlier was super helpful, and that's kind of the beginnings of demystifying this thing about what is AI, how can we use it, how can we actually intelligently think about return on investment from specific user stories and specific use cases.
Yeah, thanks. And Mark, conscious of just process, that we don't need to get a voice on every bit. So if you've got something key, because I'm going to pull on you much more later, but unless you do have some.
I broadly agree.
Great, because we'll definitely be drawing on different people on different aspects. No, thank you, Mark. Okay, so let's, again, apologies for this cadence, guys, but it's important we keep it moving. So. Broadly agree, I think, is and necessarily explorative at the moment. I also concur with James there. So let's dream a bit. If you now were to jump forward, what do you see in the next sort of 12, 24, 36 months? And also I'm interested in, is there one aspect of your current, particularly if you're in current organisation, just one aspect that's just so ripe for transformation, almost complete reinvention? So yeah, where do you see it going? Anything that you see right at the forefront of that? Oh. Mark,
I was going to largely say, I think my opinion has largely just been covered by me and Pip in the last sort of 45 minutes. I think to the point about the gap between kind of AI use and the actual outcomes of it, I think the next big one is agents, but I think it's maybe going to take slightly longer to get there than people initially thought. Towards the end of last year and early part of this year, everyone was referring to 2025 as the year of AI agents. I read a thing recently that was sort of slightly cynical, that was headlined 2025 is the year of talking about AI agents, which I sort of found slightly amusing. But I do still think that is the direction everything's going. And the next step is, how do these agents talk to each other? I think it's maybe going to take slightly longer to get there than people initially thought, but I do still think that is broadly the direction.
And actually, just to very quickly build on Mark there's a lot of industry pundits that would say, again, this has been a year of talking about agents, but where there's been exploration, it's been quite sort of tightly delineated, quite functional sort of agent use, and it's marginal gain. You eke out a little bit of efficiency, whereas the huge potential is to completely reimagine a business process from the bottom up with the full AI sort of empowerment, and that's a kind of that's quite a big sort of mindset shift, and there's a lot of brains going to be involved in that. But that's the kind of where the real benefit is going to be, almost total reimagination as empowered by AI.
Yeah, and I think there's almost a sort of irony to AI of the big breakthroughs of AI have been these general purpose models that can do anything. And I think what everyone's starting to find is actually they're better if you give them one very specific thing to do. And there's a bit of tension between those two different things. How do you get these very specific models or agents to talk to each other? Essentially, is the big next challenge. And I think it's going to unlock a lot of that.
Any more on the dream a bit, guys? James.
So on the agents thing, just before I go to where I think other things could go, I think there's a lot of confusion around agents as well when people talk about what actually is an agent. And I think there's a world of difference between building an agent in Copilot Studio that basically sends an email at the end of a process and a full agentic workflow. So the first thing is relatively easy for people to do. You can all pretty much do that within Copilot now. But to build an agentic workflow, it comes back to the method grid piece, is you actually need to get the systems in place. And I think what a lot of people are finding is that they go into experiment with agentic workflows and they realise actually that we've got a bit of work to do first to understand what are we trying to replicate in our workflow, and actually do we want to do it like that anymore? Just because we've done something like this for the last 50 years, is it best use of our time to replicate that with an agent? Actually, can we blow the whole thing up and do it differently? So I think that there's going to be a lot of that thinking going on. And then the other one I want to talk about, I think, is everyone thinks of AI as ChatGPT and an agent. I think we're going to see the rise of physical AI in terms of building AI into things, like obviously self-driving cars, but also robotics. The pace of robotics is speeding up so fast, and I don't think it's going to be too long before we start seeing humanoid robots on sites doing some of the really dangerous things that humans shouldn't be doing. So that's where I think we're going to go.
Thank you, James.
So I think part of your question about where do we see things in 24 months, 36 months' time, I think one of the really exciting things that's starting to come through is the use of agents is driving people's understanding of data. And of course, AI needs data. AI is the tip of the iceberg. The data is everything below the waterline. And what I'm finding really fascinating in business is getting the use of agents out there to help people see what data we need to make the AI work. So it's almost a virtuous cycle, a really positive one. And I think that's coming probably in a couple of years' time. That will start to be the next big thing, which would be great. Thank you.
Virtuous cycle brought into existence. And only if you've got anything burning with some of your current clients, but otherwise we keep keep moving. Okay. All right. So I think actually, for me, speaking to sort of, business leads, part of the challenge here is, let's be honest, is like, some of the senior leads of some of these organizations, they're kind of ill-equipped to understand the art of the possible really with this. It's so far from their sort of, professional kind of journey they've been on. And to be honest, we're probably all in this space a little bit as to what could be totally reimagined, reinvented with AI. You almost have to ask yourself the question: what can AI not do, ultimately, and work back from there? And it's these are big questions. Okay, very quickly, and then we're going to get to this sort of what we see in best practice at the moment. But risks. What are we seeing as the kind of current real risks, trade-offs that are being made at the moment? Operational, ethical, people related. Anybody got any thoughts on that?
I mean, look, very simply, just organisations being left behind because they're not proactively thinking about what this looks like in the future. Organisations will get left behind unless they're thinking about it.
And I genuinely think on that point, that is not hyperbole. This is like, if you don't fully understand this journey and get on it, it's going to be existential in the next 5-10 years. I mean, Amazon just pushed out a memo last week. I can't remember how many, but it's a significant amount of their workforce they've communicated are likely to be replaced with AI, just in that sector alone. So this is definitely, I think, very radical in that regard.
I mean, that reminds me of there was a thing I heard recently, around job security. Of you're unlikely to lose your job to AI, but you might lose your job to someone who can use AI.
Yeah.
Which I think, in terms of skill sets, there's a big thing there. I think I had an interesting experience a couple of weeks ago, and this is kind of from a developer point of view, but I think it applies to kind of any domain really. There's a developer tool called Cursor, which is it's an AI thing, and it kind of inverts the control of writing code. Instead of it just being a sort of tool that helps you write code, you just give it instructions at a very high level, and it kind of does everything for you. And I hadn't used it before, and I thought I'll have a play around with it. I was trying to build an extension for some program I was using. So it took me, about 5 hours of playing around with this tool, and it's very, very good. It got a couple of things wrong. I had to do a bit of manual debugging, but it was really good. And I spent, most of the day working with it, and it probably would have taken me roughly 3 times as long if I was doing it myself. So, a very, very good saving in terms of time. But my main thought at the end of the day after using it was, I learned absolutely nothing today. Usually when you're building something, especially if it's something new, as a developer, but this is going to, there's going to be equivalence with everyone. You dig into the documentation, you look at the code you're working with, you debug things, you figure things out gradually, and you learn a lot along the way, so that the next time you're doing something similar, you can bring that experience with you. I just sort of didn't really have that from this. And the danger is, when I'm delivering some code, or whatever deliverables it is in the domain we're working, our job is not just to deliver the thing we're creating. It's to be the expert about the thing we've created, the thing we're delivering, so that our colleagues, if they need to talk to us, we can talk to them about it. We can answer questions that clients might have. In the future, when our organisation gets another piece of work that's similar, we can bring that experience to it.
Just very quickly on that, there's I think it was the MIT Media Lab about quite recently dropped.
That's literally what I was just about to talk about.
Really?
Yeah, no, carry on.
Dropped a paper, which I mean, it kind of in a way it was a sort of the bleeding obvious point, which was they surveyed students who are using ChatGPT to write their essays, fundamentally, and quelle surprise. The students who used ChatGPT as opposed to wrote the essay themselves had no real retention or intellectual kind of engagement with that. And had developed, zero from that process.
And they literally like hooked them up to EEG machines and like scan their brain activity, and there was a noticeable difference.
Hollowing out of intellectual.
The hollowing out of human professional development.
And there's the short-term risk there, as I've just said. You're not the expert about this thing anymore. But there's also, long-term, if that's your default way of doing things.
Yeah.
If on a day-to-day basis you're not getting slightly better at whatever it is you're doing, over 10, 20 years cumulatively, that's absolutely huge.
Yeah, no, totally. I'm going to keep moving unless, guys, that was a real key point. Yeah.
Just on that, I think in terms of risks and everything, the thing that you've got to do is give people a credible alternative. So that's what the organisation should do, because if you don't, then the risks in terms of people going out using what I said before, shadow AI, that is very, very risky because you don't know where the information is going. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, it's a point well made. Okay, let's, if you don't mind, Jim, or did you have a point on the risk bit?
One further point on this, if I may. I brought a prop along, and the panel have been worrying about what this prop is.
Not worrying, very excited.
You have been worrying about it. So, for those of you that are gamers, you will recognise one of these. That's why this thing's broken. I wouldn't be handling it like this. But this is a classic GPU, massive cooling fans. Every time you ask a query, one of these spins up somewhere in the world. And I think out of sight should not be out of mind. And that's something else in terms of risk. We have got environmental impact. We're experiencing very hot weather today. Just be mindful when you do use AI, vast amounts of power. So I run large language models at home, okay? A bit like your experiment to get to the end of the day and think, what have I learned? But actually, I've warmed my room up in the process, and it's significant heating.
Yeah.
So I think there's another argument to be had around actually using the simplest tool for the job. And this is kind of like a sledgehammer, large language models in many respects.
Yeah.
So if you want simple correlation, don't need a large language model.
There's
Thank
definitely
you.
an element of if all you've got a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If you're using AI for absolutely everything, when it's just not necessary.
No, but it's quite a sobering point about the energy use that's going on the back end. Okay, let's move on though. So best practice, and I'm going to sort of cover a number of dimensions of this. So we'll sweep across strategy first. Just what's your organisational strategy to this? I guess how do you move from sort of this world of Wild West scattered initiatives to something that's genuinely transformative, coherent? The unit of transformation that you're seeing, back to this point about being bold. The delivery model, i.e., those teams have been made up of, how you're actually going about the transformation exercise, what skills are required there, the people skills aspect generally. There's a lot there. Governance, and I'd put under that the role of the CEO by its nature with this scale, and then just the tech data point that the guys started talking about earlier as well, what you're doing in your organisation. So again, we'll go through them. We don't need 4 voices on every one, but I know you've all got your own areas of expertise. So strategy firstly. Anybody want to talk about just organisational strategy, how you move from the Wild West to coherent, what you're seeing?
So I think the best strategy is to embrace it, and you have to go to the top. So one organisation I've seen has just gone for it. They've gone, yeah, let's do it. And it's fantastic. Another organisation's gone, oh, we're not sure, we need to wait, we need to hedge our bets. And I would say that those will definitely fall behind. Because once you enable at the board level the use of AI in the business properly, then you can let people get on with it, and it moves away from a shadow AI mode into a positive mode where the teams have been given permission to crack on. And I think that's really exciting.
Yeah.
Just to add to that, I think the strategy has to be top down and bottom up. So you've got to get that ownership from the very, very top of the business so that people know that this is being supported. But then you've got to encourage the people coming in, particularly the graduates who are coming into this very native, to come up with it. They've got some incredible ideas that we're not thinking of. And you do it both those ways. There was, and also the way that you kind of treat people who are using AI. I know this sounds a bit weird, but I heard 2 different stories recently. One was somebody in terms of coding saying to somebody, did you use AI to help you with the coding? I was probably using Cursor. And then the person was a little bit sheepish about it, saying, oh, well, maybe a bit. And the answer from the CEO was, why aren't you using it? I'm paying you good money, I want you to use it. Whereas on the other hand, someone in a project environment, someone was making a joke, oh, I bet you used AI to create that. So what's going to happen? You know, that person who's been encouraged to use it will use it more. The person who was basically ridiculed in front of their team, that's, you know, they're not going to at least admit it again. That will sink them more into the shadow side of things.
Yeah.
So I think it's got to be top down, bottom up, and change of behaviours.
Yeah, no.
I completely agree. Just very quickly, I was talking at a software engineering conference recently, and someone, I'd said something about using AI to write code just kind of in passing, and someone, when they were asking questions, expressed surprise that I'd admitted to using AI, as if it was something shameful I was admitting. So no, I think the cultural point, exactly, I think the cultural point's, it's a huge one.
Good stuff. And, well, Ed, on strategy, did you have a...
Well, I was going to go kind of strategy to execution, but
go for it.
Yeah, I mean, look, kind of picking up on your point, James, like the in terms of going from strategy to execution, thinking about people capabilities, and my particular lens from an operating model perspective and a business change perspective, it has to be, and there are some organisations that are doing this, but few, that people's objectives and the capabilities that we expect from people working in organisations specific to their functions have specific capabilities that say, look, we expect you to be doing this with AI, and at the top of the grade, if you're exceeding your performance objectives, you're finding specific use cases where you can use AI and generate a return on investment. At the bottom of the grade, you're ignoring it and you're saying, no, I'm not going to use that. And to your point earlier, maybe even you're ridiculing people for using AI. And I think those capabilities and expectations need to be built into people capability frameworks.
Yeah, no, thank you. So let's move on. Let's move to this sort of unit of transformation bit. And again, the contention that currently we're sort of dabbling with fairly myopic use cases, and we've got to be bolder, complete business case reinvention. So any examples where you've seen, or on the cusp of, seeing teams totally rethink a process, the sort of, the human AI logic, almost kind of like starting with a bold sort of assertion of, what would this look like if 60% of it was done by agents in the future? Any examples of what we're seeing there, or still do you think it's too early to?
I can jump in with a quick method grid one. I think we were pretty lucky in terms of the skill set we already had in place to kind of take advantage of AI quickly, in terms of having the technical team, the kind of professional services team. I think the big use case for us is about building playbooks. I think that's something we've massively accelerated. Alison Pip, I think you sometimes talk about getting it down from several months to weeks. And I think what we have found in terms of how we do things in the teams is a lot of horizontal communication between teams. I think more so than kind of anything else I can think of, where all of the different teams who don't necessarily have jobs that are that similar kind of get together and say, okay, well, how are you using AI? What benefits are you getting from it? Are there any tools that we can use? Because I think, usually developers in our day-to-day job, we don't have that much in common with a lot of the professional services team. But in terms of our use of AI tools, there's a ton of overlap there that I think we wouldn't have realised in both directions if we hadn't have had these kind of structured cross kind of rolled conversations and kind of meetings.
No, actually, it's jumping into the sort of the skills bit quickly, but I think just to build on Mark's point, I guess we're really quite fortunate. We're a small team, but we happen to be this quite quirky, eclectic team of having all of these very, very unique skill sets. And I guess it's a sort of a small microcosm of what's going on in large organizations, because I think, what we're seeing and our sort of, the sort of real exemplar clients we have the privilege to work for is that, that team that's driving this AI piece needs data engineers, it needs data scientists, it needs ML ops. I think that's a big bit of a blind spot for a lot of organizations. Mark, essentially for us would be ML ops. How do you productionize this? You need your legal kind of governance folk. And then clearly you need your business process experts that are bringing it into the art of, the reality. And that's quite a quirky set of skills to build, but it requires all 5 or 6 of those areas I've just mentioned.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, any more on the unit point though? What was sort of, have we seen anything really bold going on, or do we think we're still in the explorative jungle?
So one thing we're experimenting with at the moment, which is really working out well, is the use of agents to learn from the past. And it's a kind of classic use case, but it really does work. And we've directed an agent at an historic Project SharePoint site. And this particular project is highly relevant to the current one the team are performing. So part of what I'm doing is encouraging them to use the agent to go and discover what was done before.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to really drive quality into the business. The quality is conformance to requirements, right? And therefore, the project will deliver requirements. We need to make sure the team know how to do their job and how to lift the information from the past really effectively. And I think for me, that's a really exciting use case. I can see that having a huge impact. So for example, the ability to scan historic risk registers. And actually, I did some research. The stereotype is true. Risk registers are all done in spreadsheets. Yeah. I've looked at the giant data set, and I could not believe I found over 200 risk registers all in Excel format. That also needs to change.
When I was pre-chatting with Jim yesterday, we definitely need to link you up with our lesson learn kind of research. I think you'd be fascinated by something.
Just from a personal perspective, in our team, the thing that's changed is you talked about Cursor, but there's other kind of vibe coding tools out there like Lovable and Bolt. It enables us to go from what took us, maybe weeks or months to get to a proof of concept, we can do in hours now. So when you've got an idea in your head about anything, and it can be in a project context, by using one of these tools, you can come up with a working prototype really, really quickly. And you know what? Sometimes that is enough to say that doesn't work, but then you've saved all that time of having to go through that process. So that's like a kind of personal example.
Yeah, great. I'm going to keep moving again. Just getting us to the sort of the time. We could have easily filled probably 2 or 3 times on this panel. But so we touched on delivery model. Maybe we tread lightly on that now. But again, the skills that you're building in your organisations. But weave it in also to sort of people and skills training generally. James, I know you've got a number of key points on that. Maybe do you want to start with where GRIDtalk started up?
Well, I think that's the most important kind of glue that holds us all together, because this is quite daunting for a lot of people, and we know that there's lots of scare stories out there about, the Big Four reducing their graduate intake, and people are really worried about what this means. And you said before, it's going to be the person that can use AI that will take the job of the person that doesn't. So what we're trying to do is equip everyone to have those AI skills. And that doesn't mean everyone becoming coders, but it does mean people understanding how to use these systems and understand the basics. So we're trying to make sure, and this is just within GLEADS, but also with the work that I do with the RICS and a bit with the APM, it is all about skills. This is not a technology that's going away. We've got to learn to use this. It's like the internet, like I say. If you wouldn't be able to get a job if you didn't know how to use Excel, for instance, and I think it's going to be exactly the same. But unfortunately, there's still a lot of people who are paralysed a little bit by it because it's moving so fast. I think the difference with other technologies is you had like a generation to get used to it. Like take the internet from when it first came out to where it became widespread. I'd say when the smartphones came out, that was the kind of milestone. There's almost a generation there for everyone to get used to the idea. This is going so much faster. I think a lot of people kind of rabbit in headlights. They don't know what to do. And what I would encourage people to do is just get started. Coming to talks like this, great. I think you've got some practical sessions later. And just get started with it. And that's what we're trying to do at GLEADS, is encourage everyone to get started. That can be through lunch and learns. We do a lot with the apprenticeship providers. So there's people in GLEADS doing level 3, level 4, and even level 7 courses in artificial intelligence, giving everyone a suitable entry point for wherever they are. So
I think almost there's an ethical responsibility for organisations to do so. Yeah.
Absolutely.
No, thank you. Any more on that, on the people's skills? If not, I heard something quite nice and succinct recently, which was sort of, musing on the kind of future of work, to sort of, ask if you really kind of take this to its full kind of, extrapolation, what's left. But there are some key areas that are always going to be left for the human part of this, and they summarised it as involving. Taste would be one, i.e. there's an aspect of just design and creativity. You can generate anything now with AI, but ultimately we're going to need humans to sort of be the final arbiter of anything to do with design, taste, quite subjective aspects. Trust, really, really importantly. There's always going to be that final human arbiter of something that's AI generated, and whatever sort of aspect it is. Legal documentation would be a fine, example where, the ability for AI now to kind of push out an AI generated legal contract is clearly there. But if you've got to be the company that sort of pushes it out, somebody's got to finally sign off on that. So in whatever aspect of what your company is involved in, there's going to be that final kind of trust validation point that's never going to go away. And it's, to Mark's degree, otherwise, some of this stuff you just can't explain how it got there. So we're going to have to arbitrate it. And then the final one that's going to always be human is that integration point. The person that's doing that interconnectivity of business process to AI agents to, I guess in James, in your role, that's always going to be there. So, yeah, it's worth thinking about that when we look at where this is all going to go to.
Yeah, I think exactly to that point, there's always going to be someone who has to be responsible and accountable for the output, even if it is partly or almost entirely AI written. From a developer point of view, if I write some code and I use AI to write it, and then there's a bug and someone comes to me and say, I had to go, that was AI, it wasn't me. That's not a satisfactory answer to anyone.
No, totally.
I was just going to say, I think it kind of links back to the point earlier around the dynamism of playbooks, and particularly in a regulatory environment, who has the liability when things go wrong? Because things will go wrong. So who is it? It can't just be, it was the AI, I didn't know.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's going to be a key role. So a couple of aspects before we hand it over to a couple of questions is governance. So I agree. I think we've been in the Wild West. It's highly explorative, and I think a necessary phase for organisations as well. Start sowing those seeds of the art of the possible where this could go. But there needs to be at some point that balance of some governance so it doesn't become continual Wild West. Agentic sprawl could go crazy here. So I guess, do you agree with that? And do you agree also with this point that fundamentally this needs to be led by a CEO by its strategic nature? Discuss.
I think in terms of being led by a CEO, I think culturally, definitely yes. Because James, exactly to what you said before, there needs to be a culture of, it's okay to use AI, it's encouraged to use AI, obviously understanding the risks associated with doing so. But I think certainly from setting the tone, the kind of culture of it. But I think I've seen a lot of cases where, in terms of technically the use of AI has been driven almost from the bottom up, in terms of there tends to be certain individuals who kind of have that enthusiasm to kind of drive things forward. I know, Ed, you've kind of, if you want to jump in and...
Well, only a sort of minor extension to that point. AI is a general purpose technology like electricity, like the internet. There's no way that the CEO or any one or person can possibly fathom out all the potential use cases for AI. So yes, absolutely, CEO empowered, CEO championed, but it's also got to come from the bottom up.
I think above all, it's a cultural thing. It's about a reflection on what it is to be human, and what we all do as delivery professionals and seeking outcomes for our clients and for society. And I think that's where AI can really help us if we use it in the right ways. And I think I very much favour an open conversation. I feel your case study is a fantastic example. We need to be open about how we are using the technologies and where they work and where they don't work. And I think that will drive the best performing businesses.
And then there's an important point that you guys have made. I was chatting to a business leader recently and just said, look, even if for me this isn't employed for commercial gain, if it's employed for people to work less and be able to spend more time, having quality lives, and for me that's a big gain, and we've got to be careful we don't lose that part of the human sort of pursuit as well.
Yeah, just to add, so yes, it does have to be led by the CEO, but they've also got to give control to people, I was saying, from the bottom up.
Yeah.
So they can't hold it all. So it's quite a delicate balance. People got to know that it's being championed at the top, but they can't feel like it's being done from the top, because it's actually other people throughout the business that.
And I think probably the nature of the large organisations, that you've got your boomers at the top who probably they ain't going to have the answers to where the sort of real innovation is going to come from. So yeah, 100% agree with that. Good stuff. Final bit, and then Q&A, is this tech database. We've talked a little bit about some of the points that came out earlier. I think we're hearing fundamentally, every organization's got to own their data. You've got to be platform, agnostic. We wouldn't be doing anybody a service if we said this is, rah method grid. You've got to, it's got to be an AI mesh that has the ability to interoperate. I think they're really key messages, and I think the data point as well, Jim, you touched on that. In parallel, this is an unbelievable opportunity to sort of restructure, clean up that part of the data lake that's valuable for this. Any observations, comments on best practice with data strategy, technology investment strategy?
If I start, the one thing I would say about data is important, absolutely. But also I would say that don't let great be the enemy of good. So I see too many people saying, well, I'm not going to do anything until my data's perfect.
Yeah.
Your data will never be perfect.
Yeah.
So, and actually a lot of these generalized models are really good. So as long as you've got the data, it doesn't necessarily have to be fully structured. There's still a lot you can do. So I've seen too many people just getting paralyzed saying, oh, we're going to go away for 3 years and sort our data out and then we'll do AI. Well, things will change by then again. Don't, like I say, don't let great be the enemy of good. You can do an awful lot of what you've got.
Yeah, I think the key point is you're never going to punch the air and say, Eureka, we've cleaned up our data.
I think also further the point about data and data ownership, being aware of where your data is hosted is now a really big one. And I'd encourage everyone to think along with the sustainability angle is where do you keep your data? Because a lot of geopolitics going on at the moment, and I think increasingly the EU is recognising the value of having its own data centres. And I think also in terms of technology strategies to avoid vendor lock-in, once you get into a big major cloud provider, it's surprisingly hard to transition to another. So I would recommend making sure your teams understand what is held in those environments should the day come.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it's a sort of just, I would say as a caution for clients who are responsible for IT investment as well, be really nervous about vendors who are trying to do that and lock down, they kind of restrict their API set and so forth. I think that the day is done for those kind of organizations, and there's a lot of them out there, particularly big American ones, but anyway, that's a side point. Any more guys on that final point? Otherwise we're open up to...
Just very quickly, it still follows on from what James and Jim you've just said around the data. I think, these big general LLM models, what they were kind of driven by a couple of years ago was the more data, the better. Just kind of throw everything at it and let them figure it out. And I think what's kind of started to happen in the last kind of year or so is sort of the opposite of what we actually want is a smaller, higher quality data set rather than just let's throw everything at it. But, absolutely to James's point, you're never going to have a perfectly clean, beautiful data set. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
Yeah, no, totally. Thank you, Mark. We've got time, I think, for probably one or two questions. If anybody's got any observations or questions to throw in. Well, any other best practice that you're... Luke?
So, James, you really sparked my imagination when you said that there was broadband and smartphone that kind of helped the advent of growing the internet. But they feel like more hardware. I know we talked about robotics, but again, that feels like a little bit more of an output. And maybe this is a complicated challenge, but is there anything you can see in the future as being that kind of hardware facilitator to take AI to a completely new level?
Yeah, robotics is one of them, obviously, but there's all these technologies are rising together, right, and they all kind of feed off each other. The other one I think we haven't seen the end of, even though it's got a bit of a bad rap, is XR or VR, whatever you want to call it. I think that's got a long way to go, and actually seeing AI within that environment when it becomes the size of a pair of glasses is going to be quite exciting. And then the other technology that I think is going to this is debatable, I know not everyone will agree with this. I think blockchain is going to play a big role in how agents interact, because at the moment the bottleneck with agents is if they want to interact in terms of finances, that's where it all goes wrong, because you've got to come out into fiat currency. And so actually having blockchain as a way, I'm not talking about Bitcoin, but stable coins that you can actually, so there's that. And then of course there's the rise of quantum computing that's happening, which will then give more compute, and it'll be like a virtuous circle. So I think what we'll see is everything rising and then AI empowering a lot of that. But and there's probably a lot of things that we'll look back in 2 years' time and nobody would have thought about, So it's quite exciting, actually.
Well, we need a bigger conference. Yeah.
There's obviously quite a proliferation of tools in the AI space. It's kind of like the sort of app scenario where there's a GTP for kind of everything. How would you guide clients prospective clients around what are the best tools, and are we seeing any kind of general kind of filtering towards a specific set of tools for each of those kind of modules we explored earlier? That, because at the moment it feels very Wild West in it, understanding all of these different kind of tool sets is quite complicated. What would you sort of guide people to do to kind of work out which are the right ones for them?
So if I've heard your question correctly, my hearing's not very good, but if I've heard it correctly, what I'm seeing is it's a real exciting ecosystem of tools, but nonetheless people get behind specific tools and they seem to be driving a lot of the activity. So for example, if you want to play around with large language models at home and not have to go to ChatGPT, you can try Olama. Okay, so Llama, the animal with no in the front, I strongly recommend that. It's a brilliant way of getting started playing around with large language models. And that seems to have caught everyone's attention. Everyone is doing stuff around that. So you would probably find if you speak to the app developers and the businesses who are trying to make these things come true, that deep down people are aware of all of these particular tool sets. Another one you can try, which I find fascinating, is graph databases. There's a big fuss going on about how graphs are a better way of structuring knowledge, and therefore they are a very good way to inform large language models. So you can try a tool called Obsidian. I recommend that. Give that a whirl. It's got a brilliant, like a graphical mind map way of looking at things, but people are looking at how to use Obsidian to drive AI for your personal use. So it's massive questions, massive answer. There's so much out there. Thank you.
Just very quickly as well, just slightly tangentially to that. I mean, if we're talking about, what are the best kind of AI models to use, which ones should be directing clients towards? I think the answer is partly it sort of doesn't matter. Like all of the kind of big models, the Claude, the OpenAI, the Gemini, they're all roughly the same. And if you have a look at this kind of leaderboard, it's very difficult to quantify which one's the best, but there's kind of leaderboards that try to do so. And it'll be 1 week, it'll be, Google have just released this model, it's the best one on this leaderboard. And then a week later, Claude has overtaken it, and then the new version of ChatGPT has overtaken it. So I would say don't worry too much specifically about which of these models people are using, because as well, if things are going the direction we think they're going in, and which a lot of people think they're going in, the goal is for these models, whatever it is you're using, to interact with all other models, and it doesn't really matter what these different models are, as long as they can talk to each other. So I'd say don't worry too much about what's the absolute state-of-the-art model or tool that you're using.
I guess fundamentally, to unleash this, as an organization, again, you take control of it, you own your own data, you own your own agent layer and the agent interoperable layer. You've got to be building, as an organization, those agents. And there'll be multiple kind of low-code ways of doing that. But being super kind of minded of just plugging in something that you're losing your data to a kind of an app over here, because I think organizations are going to have to take ownership of that agentic architecture, and that is your own development, your own kind of purpose largely as well. Lots of ways of doing that, and that's going to evolve quickly as well. That's the fundamental kind of point I would say about selecting. I think unless there's any kind of burning kind of final points anyone on the panel wants to make, I think just conscious of time, we could have easily spent twice as long, but a bit of a sweep through quite a massive topic, but just to put our hands together to say a huge thank you to the four. Thank you guys. Cheers.